In 1923, a slaughterhouse worker named Joseph Kowalski was cited by Illinois conservation officers for using an unlicensed fishing method on the Chicago River. The method wasn't dynamite, it wasn't netting, it was blood. Specifically, it was dried blood powder swept from the concrete floors of the Swift & Company meatpacking plant, where Kowalski worked 6 days a week. He and dozens of other workers would collect the coagulated residue in cloth sacks, tie the sacks to weighted lines, and sink them into the river on Sunday mornings. Within minutes, catfish, carp, and even northern pike would converge on the site in numbers that local anglers had never seen. By 1927, the practice had spread to every major industrial city with a slaughterhouse and a river. By 1931, Michigan became the first state to ban the use of blood products as fishing attractants. Today, 14 states have explicit prohibitions against it. I tested the modern equivalent in 3 separate bodies of water over the span of 9 days. The modern equivalent is blood meal, a garden fertilizer made from dried slaughterhouse waste, sold in powder form at hardware stores for approximately $2 per pound. The results were identical to what Kowalski and his co-workers experienced a century ago. Let me explain the biology first, because this isn't about superstition or tradition. This is about olfactory neuroscience. Blood meal is composed of roughly 13% nitrogen by weight, with the remainder being desiccated hemoglobin, plasma proteins, and trace minerals, primarily iron. When you place blood meal powder inside a porous fabric pouch and submerge it in water, the powder doesn't dissolve instantly. Instead, it hydrates slowly, releasing molecules into the surrounding water at a rate determined by current, temperature, and the weave density of the fabric. The primary attractants are free amino acids, particularly glycine, alanine, and proline, which leach out of the hemoglobin matrix as it breaks down. These amino acids are the same compounds that fish associate with wounded or decaying prey. In controlled studies published in the Canadian Journal of Fisheries and Aquatic Sciences, researchers found that catfish can detect amino acid concentrations as low as 1 part per billion, and they will actively track gradient plumes upstream for distances exceeding half a mile. Blood meal also releases heme iron, the iron compound found in red blood cells. Heme iron is paramagnetic, meaning it interacts weakly with magnetic fields, but more importantly, it oxidizes in water to form ferrous ions. These ions don't just add scent, they change the chemical signature of the water itself, creating a detectable disturbance that fish interpret as a feeding opportunity. The first test was in a tributary of the Arkansas River, a muddy, slow-moving channel with visibility under 12 inches. I used a 4-inch square of cheesecloth, filled it with 2 tablespoons of blood meal, tied it shut with fishing line, and secured it 18 inches above a bare treble hook weighted with a 1-ounce pyramid sinker. I cast it into a deep eddy where the current slowed and debris accumulated. I didn't have to wait long. At 7 minutes, I saw the first swirl near the surface, 10 feet upstream from my rig. At 9 minutes, I had a fish on. It was a channel catfish, 16 inches, approximately 2.5 pounds. I released it, reset the same pouch, and cast again. At 13 minutes, another strike. At 18 minutes, another. In 1 hour, I landed 6 catfish and lost 2 more that threw the hook during the fight. The blood meal pouch, after an hour of submersion, had lost roughly 60% of its mass, but the remaining powder was still active. I could see smaller fish, likely juvenile sunfish and shad, darting in and out of the scent plume. The second test was in a stocked lake in Missouri, with clear water and moderate fishing pressure. This was a controlled environment where the fish were accustomed to artificial lures, bread balls, and corn kernels. I used the same setup, but I anchored the rig in 12 feet of water near a submerged brush pile. The response was different. The fish didn't swarm immediately. Instead, I observed a pattern that resembled what biologists call staging behavior. Larger fish, primarily carp and catfish, would approach the blood meal pouch, circle it at a distance of 5 to 10 feet, then retreat. This went on for roughly 20 minutes before the first fish committed. When it did commit, It wasn't tentative. It was a full inhalation. I landed a 22-inch common carp that weighed just under 7 pounds. Over the next 2 hours, I caught 3 more carp, 2 catfish, and a largemouth bass that I didn't expect. Bass are primarily visual predators, but in turbid or low-light conditions, they rely heavily on olfaction, and the amino acid plume from the blood meal was potent enough to override their usual prey selection. The third test was the one that made me understand why this method was banned. I fished a river in Arkansas that runs adjacent to a wildlife management area. The regulations were strict. No chumming, no live bait in certain zones, and no blood products of any kind. I waited until I was in an unrestricted section downstream. Then I deployed the blood meal rig in fast current. Within 15 minutes, I had attracted not just fish, but a game warden. He approached in a patrol boat, asked to see my license, and then asked what I was using. I showed him the blood meal pouch. He told me that while blood meal wasn't explicitly illegal in that particular county, it was a gray area, and he recommended I switch to something else. He said that blood products create feeding frenzies that can disrupt spawning behavior and attract protected species like paddlefish and sturgeon, which are illegal to target in most states. I complied. I removed the rig. But before I did, I had already caught 4 fish in 15 minutes, including a 19-inch flathead catfish that hit the blood meal with enough force to nearly pull the rod out of my hand. Now let me explain why the industry doesn't want you using this. The synthetic blood bait market is a subset of the larger catfish bait industry, and it's built on the premise that you need a specialized, scientifically formulated product to attract fish. Companies sell small bottles of liquid blood extract or blood-scented gels for anywhere from $8 to $15. These products contain trace amounts of actual blood, diluted with water, preservatives, and thickening agents to extend shelf life. A $2 bag of blood meal from a garden center contains more actual blood protein than 10 bottles of commercial blood bait combined. It's not diluted. It's not preserved. It's raw, desiccated hemoglobin in powder form, and when it hydrates in water, it creates a scent plume that synthetic products can't replicate. The reason it was banned in 14 states isn't because it's dangerous to fish populations. It's because it's too effective. When every angler in a region starts using blood meal, the competitive advantage collapses, and the fish become conditioned to avoid it. State wildlife agencies recognized this in the 1930s and 40s, and they preemptively restricted its use to preserve the integrity of sport fishing. But in the states where it's still legal, and in the waterways where enforcement is sporadic, blood meal remains one of the most cost-effective attractants ever documented. Kowalski didn't invent this method. He learned it from Polish immigrants who used similar techniques in the Vistula River in the late 1800s, long before commercial fishing baits existed. They didn't have access to prepared baits. They used what was available, and what was available in industrial cities was blood. The footage I recorded shows fish after fish responding to a product that costs less than a cup of coffee. The strikes are aggressive. The hook sets are clean. The fish don't inspect the bait. They attack it. I used a medium-heavy rod, 20-pound braided line, and a fabric pouch filled with fertilizer. I didn't use a boat. I didn't use electronics. I didn't use bait that requires refrigeration or special storage. The method works because fish are driven by chemoreception, not by brand loyalty. They don't care if the amino acids come from a bottle labeled pro-grade catfish attractant or from a bag of garden powder. They respond to molecular signals that indicate food, and blood meal delivers those signals at a concentration that commercial products can't match. The slaughterhouse workers in Chicago understood this in 1923. The wildlife agencies understood it in 1931. The fishing industry understands it now, which is why you'll never see blood meal advertised in a tackle catalog. This is what they didn't want documented.